Okay, so brilliant you got here, and thanks for the good attendance. I'm Claude Moraes, I'm chairing the meeting, and this meeting is organised by SME for Labour and 89 Up at the agency, and we have quite a strong panel of speakers. Jack McConnell will be here shortly. He's just there, Jack. No problem. Yeah. So the former First Minister of Scotland could also not find the room. So yeah, maybe they should develop a signage somewhere. Anyway, listen, thank you very much for coming. There's been a sort of proliferation, a very positive, I think, proliferation of meetings on the EU and Brexit and foreign policy, and I think that just reflects the need for party members in particular to engage with this issue, not to leave it by the sidelines. And I think that's an important thing, so I'm quite pleased with that. And this is one of those meetings. What I'll do is I will quickly go through who's speaking. I won't say anything after that. I'll ask the speakers maybe to just do a snapshot of what they think are the challenges, the opportunities, particularly from a party perspective, our positioning on Brexit, maybe 2 or 3 minutes max. And I'm pretty sure, looking at the audience here, that we'll get some discussion going and some questions. And if we don't, they can speak for a bit longer. They're all politicians, they know how to do that. So let's just begin with a quick introduction to everyone. On my left is Lord McConnell, Jack McConnell, who was, of course, the First Minister of Scotland, but in the Lords, and also as an MSP, he maintained a very strong interest in the EU and international relations. Then we've got Lara Parizotto. Laura's a councillor, but she worked for the 3 Million, and she was a co-founder of Migrants for Labour. And then I've got my former colleagues, Clare McConnell, who amongst many... Clare is not just married to Jack McConnell, although if there's something you want to tell me, Jack. So Clare, my long-standing colleague, whose name I just changed, was MEP for the South West up until 2020. Do you want me to speak a bit louder? Yeah, okay. Was the MEP for the South West until 2020, and Neena Gill, also my colleague, was Labour MEP for the West Midlands up until 2020. And of course, there's so much more that they can give to this issue, but those are the headlines. Good. Okay, so let's get started. Jack, are you okay to go?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start with Jack. I'm just asking everyone to do maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll get a discussion going. So Jack McConnell, please.
Okay. Thanks very much, Claude. It's a bit of a worry when somebody that you knew when they were about this size in Stirling back in the day has become a bit of a veteran of Labour international politics. Says something about my age, maybe, rather than Claude's. But it's great. It's great to be here, and it is great to see our former MEPs generating this debate about what is global Britain for the Labour Party in the aftermath of Brexit. I mean, clearly we have seen in these last 2 years, yes, in the aftermath of Brexit, but perhaps much more urgently and immediately in the impact that they have had nationally and globally. We have seen through the global pandemic, which not only impacted on health, but crucially has had a catastrophic impact on the education of those, particularly those in the poorest and least developed countries around the world, for an education and extreme poverty everywhere. We have seen the increasing impact of the climate crisis, which we knew was there, and we were hoping there was going to be action on, but we see increasingly, month after month, the impact of that, whether it's in drought in East Africa, or it's in floods in Pakistan, or an impending typhoon about to hit the Philippines, which will destroy development there yet again, which happens to them all too often. And then this year, of course, we've seen the impact of in my view, the decline in the international effort for peace-building, conflict prevention and security, resulting ultimately in Russia's confidence to invade Ukraine, and the impact that has had around the world, not just on our security and our confidence our freedom from fear, but also on the challenge to democracy and human rights and the global food security crisis that is resulting. We see in all of these things the interdependence of the world that we live in. And it just seems to me that this is fundamental to everything that we believe in. Yes, we believe in social solidarity. Yes, we believe in the UK, and we are here to elect the Labour government in the UK to fight for the national interest and improve our communities here. But if we don't understand that our world is interdependent in a way that maybe was a slogan in the 1990s, but it's today such a crucial reality in our daily lives and in the daily lives of everybody else in the world, then we're not going to have a foreign policy or an approach that's fit for government or fit for the 21st century. And I think as we look forward to, if I have the brief opportunity just to say a couple of things, as we look forward to at least the potential of a Labour government and the opportunity to govern, and therefore the absolute need to be ready to govern again, because as a party we have never successfully dominated an election and then had a massive majority in Parliament that allows us to govern with the freedom and the opportunity to make real fundamental change, unless we've got our foreign policy right as well, whether that was in 1945 or in the mid-1960s or in 1997. We had an approach to foreign policy that the British people trusted but could also see was ambitious for the future. We need to have that again. And in my view, we need to have at the centre of that, obviously the climate crisis, but also crucially, and this is a real reality for people today, perhaps more than it's been for some time, the need to have conflict prevention, peace building at the centre of that as well. We also need to make sure that we have an approach to development that is around a framework and is not ad hoc and able to be changed at the press of a ministerial button in the way that we've seen over the last 2 years and more. The Sustainable Development Goals, the internationally agreed framework for development at the centre of our approach to international development, helping nations and communities grow their own economies and their own public services, not trying to dictate from the north to the south with aid budgets that can be wiped away at the swipe of a pen. And then crucially, I think, to rebuild international institutions and a belief in democracy and the rule of law. We need to stand for that fundamentally. If we are anything, we believe in the freedom of people to choose their own governments, to choose their own lives, and to speak freely about those decisions being made around them. And I think as a party, we've not been as vocal about that, in my view, over the last 10, 15 years as we should have been. But we now need to make sure that we strike a chord on that too. And if we put those three things at the centre of our approach to foreign policy and international relations, then we can develop a global, I would say UK rather than Britain, but a global UK that is a force for good in the world under a Labour government.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jack. Stick around for some questions, if that's okay. That's brilliant. I apologise at the beginning, I didn't mention Darren Jones. Darren is the MP for...
I forgot myself.
Yeah, I'll rename everyone. So Darren Jones. Darren, Jack, please. He's known me since I was a child. It's not a good thing, so it's all going to be like that. Okay, so Darren Jones, MP for Bristol North West, but most importantly, Darren's on the EU-UK Parliamentary Assembly at the moment, which is the formal mechanism to link both, and you might want to say something about that. I'm just going to now take Clare Moody. Clare, and Clare was the MEP for the South West up until 2020, amongst many other things. Clare.
Thank you, Claude, and it's lovely to see you again, honest. Can you hear me all right? If the microphone's there.
If you want to go,
I can. I'll stay here if you don't mind, and then as long as you can hear me. Shout if you can't. I have been told to be brief, so actually what I'm just going to do is give you some headlines around questions you might want to ask about what has happened to our reputation in the world in the last 6 or 7 years under this Tory government, and then you can read from that the Labour Party can, and I believe will, do the exact opposite of what has happened in those last years and where we are now. As Claude said, I had the privilege of being a member of the European Parliament, so that gave me a chance to see the UK from both sides of the channel. It gave me a chance as a British politician to kind of understand, have an intimate knowledge of the European institutions, but also in those European institutions to see how the UK was perceived from our colleagues across the rest of the EU. But also as an MEP, I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I also worked internationally and therefore across the globe with parliamentarians from around the world and civil society and elsewhere. And before 2016, in that kind of world stage situation, obviously I didn't agree with the Tories and what was happening, but actually, globally, the UK had a huge reputation. After the Brexit vote, it was absolutely telling that people said to me, what has your country done? Quite often they'd say it behind closed doors, they wouldn't criticise the UK government, but that was the question that came through. And then the years after that, as they watched how the UK government behaved, first Theresa May and then, God help us, Boris Johnson, they were just jaw-dropping. They had an understanding of our country as being such a respected actor on the world stage. And now they didn't recognise this country in those conversations. And that is one of the first jobs of the next Labour government, which I believe they will fulfil, to bring our standing back to where it should be and where it will be when we win the next election. But I'm just, because I think we will a lot of us say some of the things, but 3 headlines. One, which Jack has talked about, international development. Again, we were one of the big global players on international development. The US is obviously huge. Germany has that stable framework and is a very important international development actor. We were. This, just in recent months, we've lost the budget. So that there is not, we apparently no more international development. So that role, having the separate department back. Human rights. Again, having that voice on the global stage, standing up for human rights. We're threatening to come out of the UK is threatening to come out of the ECHR under this administration, out of the European Court of Human Rights. Never mind having come out of the EU. We have that takes away our voice to talk about people's rights around the world. And finally, international treaties. Again, we have ripped up our reputation because this government has said in the House of Commons that it will break international law. So these things all can and will change with a Labour government. But dear God, rebuilding our reputation is going to take some effort, and we'll need to do it with consistency and work, because we have gone through some really tough years. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I just want to mention, just to thank SME for Labour for doing this and the other fringes, and also to mention what 89 Up is. It's the European Impact Agency, and it campaigns for charities and good causes, just to mention our 2 sponsors. So now we have Darren Jones. Darren.
I'm going to stand, if that's okay, although I'm conscious I feel like I might be doing a TED talk. So, as was mentioned, I'm of the EU-UK Parliamentary Assembly, but I also chair the Business Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee in the House of Commons. And so I just want to touch a little bit on those issues and provide some examples for our discussion in Q&A. But can I start by saying that I used to go to Brussels when we had brilliant Labour MEPs, brilliant Labour commissioners, and you went in with your head held high because you knew that Britain made a really important contribution and that we were really respected and valued in the institutions in Europe. We now go, and it's a bit awkward, it's a bit like your parents have got divorced, you really want them to get back together, but this is not going to for the time being at least. And you go in, and the relationship is suddenly very, very different. Now, we have lots of great friends and allies in the S&D group who we used to work with in the European Parliament, who want to work with us on the Labour side to improve and repair the relationship, as Clare has mentioned. And boy, do we need to do so, because there are a whole host of issues where we must collaborate, where we want to collaborate, where we will benefit mutually by collaborating, even though we've left the European Union institutions. But we can't do so because the relationship is in such a bad place with the Conservatives and the Conservative government. Until we resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol, which, by the way, the Conservatives designed, signed, approved, and then rejected unilaterally, we're not going to open the opportunities from further collaboration. I'll just mention a few. So the first one I'll mention is on research and science collaboration. We all know that the UK has brilliant universities, world-leading universities, and we benefited enormously from our association, our membership of the EU with Horizon 2020. We made more money in terms of UK research and innovation than we paid to be in the system. We've now left the EU, and we want to associate back into the project for third country status, but we can't do so until the Northern Ireland Protocol is resolved. That is a huge loss for British research and innovation, and also a huge loss for European research and innovation. And we can't even talk about it because the relationship is so bad. The second issue I just want to mention is around competition policy. We know that productive growing economies are assisted by strong competition. That's something that the European single market benefits from. Again, in the UK, we have very strong competition experience with the Competition and Markets Authority, with our work on digital markets in the UK. But we could be so much better if we were able to collaborate closely with the competition authorities and practice in the EU, as well as within the US. But we refuse to do so because of the state of our relationship. The third thing I want to mention is energy. Now, we're obviously all in an energy crisis at the moment. Europe has enormous challenges in trying to unplug itself from Russian fossil fuels in particular, but needs to speed up its investment in renewables. And this is one of my absolute bugbears. The North Sea has obviously a huge amount of capacity for offshore wind, but we will only be able to build out as many turbines as possible if they are interconnected. Because if it's too windy and it's only plugged into the UK, there is too much electricity for us to take. We can't take it all. Whereas if we could share it with the EU, then it'd be much easier to manage. But as it is at the moment, we have UK investments going into North Sea offshore wind, we have European investments going into North Sea offshore wind, and they're not plugged together, which means that collectively we're building fewer offshore wind turbines and not meeting the capacity that we have for renewable energy at a time when it is obviously essential for us to do so. But we're not even talking about it because of the state of the relationship in the Northern Ireland Protocol. And just lastly on trade, for all of the rolled over trade deals that Liz Truss signed through as Trade Secretary, for all of the talk, although she's now written off the US-UK trade deal, which by the way is because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, Europe is still our largest trading partner. That's why Keir, Rachel, Johnny have all said we've got to make Brexit work. We've got to get the fundamentals of the trade and cooperation agreement actually working because the friction in the system at the moment is bad for British business. But we can't do so because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And now we have the Prime Minister, who was the Foreign Secretary, who was supposed to fix this, basically writing off the trade deal with the US, writing off the opportunity for collaboration with the EU because of ideology in the Conservative Party. It is self-inflicted harm for the British economy. It continues to ruin our relationship with the EU as well as with other allies. I've just come back from DC last week. The Northern Ireland Protocol came up time and time and time again in America as well as in my meetings in Brussels. And it's all because of Liz Truss and the Conservative Party, which is why Clare is absolutely right, that not only do we need to win the next election for the UK, but we need to win it for the UK's role in the world and as a clear, trusted and close partner with the European Union. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Darren. I should also mention Richard Corbett, our last leader with the EPLP, is also here with us. Has come today. Thanks, Richard. So now we've got Lara Parizotto. Lara, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? I'm also interested in staying here. So I'm really grateful for having been invited to this because often in conversations like this, the perspective that is missed is from EU citizens in the UK who were gravely affected by Brexit. So we were promised during the campaign Global Britain, and what we've seen so far is nothing of that sort. I'm from Brazil, but I entered the UK with an Italian passport. And the lies that we were told that more people from different countries were going to be able to enter the UK after Brexit were just lies. Many people from South America, like me, have those connections with Europe that are historical and have those European passports that give us the privilege to be able to travel around as well. But now, even if my friends back in Brazil want to potentially move to the UK, now they have to go through the new UK immigration system, which is nothing compared to what we had before, not easy at all, and is definitely a lot more exclusive. But just to bring back to the perspective of the 6 million EU settlement scheme applications that were made here in the UK after Brexit. The UK government likes to boast about the number, 6 million applications. Look how good we've done. Like, we've had all of these people applying because they're so interested in staying here. Well, we had no other option but to apply, otherwise we were going to lose our rights to stay here. And I worked for the 3 Million, which is one of the main organizations campaigning on EU citizens' rights. And I also am OISC accredited to give advice on the EU settlement scheme. So for the last 2 years, I have been supporting vulnerable EU citizens apply for the EU settlement scheme. There's one man from Portugal. I helped him apply in May last year, very close to the deadline. Today is some day of September. He still does not have status. He is living in the UK without status. He's been living here for 6 years, but because of complications, because he is a vulnerable citizen, he does not have rights. He's having to go back to live with his mum. He finds it really difficult to get a job. And he's not the only one. There are hundreds of thousands of EU citizens stuck in the process, still waiting for status. And that is not only just affecting them in here, and let's not undermine how bad that effect is of not being able to prove your right to live and work in the country that you've called home for however long. This is affecting our reputation outside of the UK as well. We've been having conversations with MEPs, begging them to please help us here in the UK with however they can, because our government is just not interested. We send them letters after letters, telling them about the problems that EU citizens here are facing. They just boast again about 6 million applications. That's all that they want to focus on. So we need expert influence from outside to investigate what's happening here. And the UK's withdrawal agreement is going to be investigated by the EU Commission because of breaches to how they're treating EU citizens. So that's why we need Labour's forensic approach to policies like this, because these are not simple things. They need that expertise to make sure that people are receiving the rights that they need. And it doesn't stop there. We now have this Rwanda Plan as well, which is also being investigated by the UN Refugee Agency. So again, it goes back to, we were promised this global Britain where people from all over the world were going to be able to come here and work and contribute to ways that the EU was blocking us from doing in the past, but we haven't seen that come to pass. We've seen just more hostile environment policies, we've seen more closing our borders, become more inward looking. People who want to come here, who want to contribute their skills, are now having to provide that they're going to meet certain point criteria, which is often unattainable, and are being, when it comes to refugees, when they need us the most, they're coming to our borders, and what are we doing to them? We're turning our backs to them and sending them to another country, sometimes to a country where we actually take refugees from, so then not necessarily providing the safety that they need. And when it comes to democracy as well, EU citizens have been able to vote in the UK's local elections. The Elections Act, which we all know has not been great, has also now stripped the right to vote of EU citizens who enter the UK after 2021. So all that we're doing is creating further and further complications because of Brexit. We talked about how we needed to make things simpler, how the EU was making things too difficult for us, red tape and all of that. But in reality, what we have been seeing is that, for example, when it comes to EU citizens, rights being taken away, the right to live, to work, and even to vote in the UK. So our partners in Europe and elsewhere are looking at this, and the MEPs that we talk to are saying the UK is hurting our citizens who live there. What is the benefit for us to not treat UK citizens the same that you're treating EU citizens in the UK? So we need, it goes back to all that bargaining chip conversation that we had during the debate, where the UK government was so reluctant to just offer us the rights that we needed because they wanted EU countries to do the same. Well, we are the ones who took the decision to leave the EU, so we need to be the one proactively taking the first step, giving those rights so that UK citizens can have the same in other countries. But that's not what we have been seeing, so that's why we need the Labour government to also look at it into it with detail and use their expertise and listen to the voices of campaigners with lived experience on this issue as well.
Thanks very much, Laura. I forgot about that Global Britain thing. That Global Britain. Anyway. So our final speaker is Neena Gill. Neena, please.
Thank you, Claude. Just a few headlines. SMEs are the lifeblood of any economy. You know, in the UK, they're 99% of the business, 60% of the employers, and 50% of the revenue comes from them. But just like the country, they've been on a roller coaster for the last years, because uncertainty about the kind of Brexit there was going to be had a real impact on SMEs up and down the country, especially the region that I represented, the West Midlands. So confidence, business confidence continued to drop in terms of future prospects, but actually, interestingly, you know, it's halved in the last 2 quarters because the reality of Brexit has started to bite. And you can see it's not just, we've heard about the increase in energy costs, in transportation cost, but what is interesting is we used to all talk about just in time. I remember all the kind of pre-Brexit campaigning days, but now just in time has become just in case. So what SMEs are having to do is to kind of crystal ball gaze as to what they might have to do, what they might have to plan for, because everything has a really, really long lead-in period because of the interdependence that we've already heard from the others, you know, in terms of supply chain, in terms of raw materials. So they're really struggling to predict what they might need for 9 to 12 months now, you know, ahead. And that's really difficult if you think about their operations, which tend to be much smaller than the larger organizations who probably have access to data, who have that information technology to be able to perhaps predict. And in this kind of volatile market, it's much harder for them to know what the customer might want in a year's time. So actually that has been really a major impact on many SMEs. But another impact, which we've heard very little about, is they're now finding that the quality of the goods, there is a notice that they're importing from, let's say, other European countries, it's actually dropped. So the quality often is far worse than what they were getting before. And this is really not talked about. So there is a feeling amongst the SME sector that they're totally powerless in this game. And this is as a result of Brexit, because many of them are experiencing labour shortages as EU citizens have left. And they can't find the right skills where they were able to, perhaps in partnership, before be able to recruit those skills in other countries. Now, I want to really end by a quote from an SME manufacturer who told me about the impact of Brexit that it's had. What they said is, they said, you know, I think the fundamental is that without the economies of scale of large businesses, change is very difficult to adapt to. Rapid change and continuously changing environment, always something new, post-Brexit this is is becoming very hard for the SME sector, and this is what a Labour government really needs to figure out how they're going to address. So I'm looking at you, Darren. You know, it's the reality of what is happening in the production cycle. Things take time to build. You know, we have very few raw materials ourselves, and so most of them are reliant on importing that. So the cost of those can go up considerably from when they order to when the goods arrive. So it's really the price changes. It means that they have to perhaps have greater storage than they had to, but they are in huge competition from Amazon, who tend to take up those spaces that are available. So I think what I would really say is that the productivity cycle is really impacted for the manufacturing sector, and that is what we need to figure out how we think. So really, even for them ordering locally has had a huge impact, right? It's because of the transportation issues, because their suppliers are not able to get those goods, and in terms of the energy costs, which we've already heard. Thanks.